Margaret Caldwell had built her empire from nothing, turning a small textile business into a multi-million-dollar corporation over 30 years of relentless dedication. She was known in boardrooms across the country as a woman of precision and control, someone who never left anything to chance, someone who always knew exactly what was happening in every corner of her world. But on that particular Tuesday afternoon, when her flight from Geneva landed 6 hours early due to a canceled business meeting, she found herself walking through the grand doors of her estate without any warning to her staff, without the usual scheduled arrival that kept the household prepared and polished. She stepped into the marble foyer, set her leather bag down quietly, and followed the sound of something she had not expected to hear. Laughter, pure and unrestrained, echoing from the direction of the East Garden. Margaret had adopted her triplets, Lily, Leo, and little Lena, 3 years ago from a state facility that had struggled to place them together, because all three were profoundly deaf and required specialized care that most families were not equipped to provide. Margaret had resources, yes, but in truth she had spent much of the past 2 years consumed by work, leaving their daily care and education to a team of professionals. She paid generously and trusted completely. She loved her children deeply, but love, she had told herself many times, was also about providing the best therapists, the best sign language tutors, the best school for the deaf in the state. She moved through the corridor toward the garden and stopped at the glass doors, her hand hovering over the handle, completely frozen by what she saw. Her head housekeeper, Rosa, a stout 60-year-old woman from a small village in Mexico, who had worked for Margaret for over 15 years, was sitting cross-legged on the grass in her full uniform, apron and all, with the 3 children gathered around her in a circle. But that was not the extraordinary part. Rosa's hands were moving, slowly, deliberately, carefully, and the triplets were watching her with the kind of focused, wide-eyed attention that children only give to something that fills them with joy. Rosa was signing, not perfectly, not with the fluid grace of a trained interpreter, but with genuine effort and unmistakable love, forming each letter and each word, with the concentration of someone who had been practicing quietly, privately, for months. Lily signed something back and Rosa laughed out loud, throwing her head back and then signed again, and Leo corrected her gently, shaping her fingers into the right position, and Rosa nodded earnestly and tried again. Lena, the smallest and shyest of the 3, crawled into Rosa's lap and rested her head against the older woman's chest, and Rosa wrapped one arm around her and kept signing with the other hand, telling them what Margaret would later learn was a story about a little bird who couldn't sing but learned to dance instead. Margaret stood at that glass door for a long time before she opened it. When she finally did, Rosa looked up with a start, scrambling to get up from the grass, smoothing her apron with flushed cheeks, beginning to apologize for the informality, for sitting on the ground, for the children being outside during their scheduled reading hour. Margaret crossed the garden in 5 steps and knelt down in the grass herself, right there in her tailored suit and silk blouse, and she took Rosa's hands in hers and looked at them. The calloused, weathered hands of a woman who cooked and cleaned and managed a grand household. Hands that had quietly, without being asked, without extra pay, without recognition, learned an entirely new language just so 3 small children would feel less alone. Margaret could not speak for a moment. When she finally found her words, she asked Rosa simply, "How long?" Rosa replied softly, "Since the first month they came home, Senora. I watched videos every night after my shift. I wanted them to know that someone here could talk to them." Margaret turned to look at her children. Lily was watching her with careful eyes. Margaret raised her hands and signed, slowly and imperfectly but unmistakably, "I love you." All 3 of them lit up at once, the kind of radiance that comes from being truly seen, and they signed it back to her together, small hands moving through the afternoon light like tiny wings. That evening, Margaret called her office and rearranged her calendar for the next 2 months. She hired a sign language coach for herself, and she gave Rosa a hug that lasted longer than either of them expected, the kind of embrace between 2 people who have both, in different ways, just begun to understand what it truly means to show up for someone who needs you. If this story moved your heart the way it moved ours, please give it a like. share it with someone who believes in the quiet power of kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Corner Stories for more tales that remind us what really matters in this world.